Hello ladies and gentlemen, you read the title. This will be a deep dive into war in the iceberg format. An iceberg is composed of stuff that is well known on the top and gets more and more obscure the lower you get. I'm sorry if I mispronounced some things, let's get started. The first war we are covering on level 1 is the Football War, or the 100 Hours War. This war was fought between El Salvador and Honduras in 1969. Both of these countries love, and I mean love football. The immediate trigger was a series of incidents during the qualifying match for the 1970 FIFA World Cup. Tensions between the two countries had been escalating due to issues such as immigration disputes, land reform, and economic inequality. The football match served as a catalyst, sparking violence between the fans and exacerbating the existing animosity. El Salvador invaded Honduras, but before long, the offensive was stalled. A ceasefire was established by the Organization of American States. The exact number of casualties is disputed, but thousands were displaced and hundreds lost their lives. The Emu War was a war fought in Australia against a particular enemy, emus. You see, emus were perceived as a pest problem in Australia. The government, which had issues with emus eating crops, decided to take military action to control the emu population. In November 1932, soldiers armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 100,000 rounds of ammunition were deployed to the Kampong district. The goal was to cull the emu population and reduce the damage caused to the crops by these large birds. The Emu War turned out to be a failure due to the speed of the emus, the durability of them, with some being able to survive several shots, and the sheer number of them. The War of the Bucket took place in 1325 and erupted between the rival city-states of Bologna. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right. Bologna? I don't know how to pronounce that. The catalyst for the war was the capture of a bucket from the well in Bologna by soldiers from Modena, escalating tensions between the two states. Despite its seemingly trivial origin, it actually had an impact in the wider Italian geopolitical scene. The Pig War was a war that happened in 1856 that happened between the United States and Canada. The dispute arose over the San Juan Islands, where both nations claimed sovereignty. The catalyst for the conflict was the shooting of a pig belonging to an American settler by a British employee. The situation was diffused by military commanders on both sides, who recognized the potential for a more significant conflict. Eventually, diplomats from the United States and Britain negotiated a peaceful resolution, and the islands were jointly occupied for the next 12 years until a settlement was reached through arbitration. The Zanzibar War was a war that occurred on August 27, 1896, between the Sultanate of Zanzibar and the United Kingdom. It is famously known as the shortest war in history, lasting only 38 minutes. The British issued an ultimatum for the Sultan to step down. When it expired without compliance, British warships bombarded the imperial palace in Zanzibar. The overwhelming firepower of the British fleet quickly subdued the opposition, leading to the surrender of the Sultan's forces. The first war on level 2 is the Parsley War, which occurred in October 1937 between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. The spark for the war was an incident involving the assassination of a Haitian cattle thief in the Dominican Republic. The Dominican dictator used this incident as pretext to initiate a brutal campaign against Haitians living across the border. Dominican soldiers systematically executed thousands of Haitians and Dominicans of Haitian descent. The casualties range from 17,000 to 35,000. These people died in just 6 days of conflict. The Irish-Canada War, also called the Fianna Raids, is a war that is strange, considering Ireland and Canada are separated by an entire ocean. However, the war was fought mainly by people from Irish descent in the United States. The Fianna Brotherhood, an Irish nationalistic organization, staged a series of raids into Canada in the late 19th century. These raids, occurring between 1866 and 1871, were part of the Fianna attempts to put pressure on the British government to grant independence to Ireland. Keep in mind, Canada was a colony of Great Britain during this time. The Fianna raids had limited success and did not achieve their political objectives. The Saar offensive isn't a war, but was instead a singular offensive that took place between France and Nazi Germany. At the start of World War II, France and Germany had this border, called Alsace-Lorraine. The forts made it extremely difficult to attack from Germany to France, but the forts also made it difficult to attack from France to Germany. The Saar offensive was not successful, being largely symbolic and not resulting in any significant military engagement. The Battle of Tanga, also known as the Battle of the Bees, was the opening battle in World War I against the German colony of Tanzania, and you'll never guess why it's called the Battle of the Bees. As British and Indian forces advanced through the dense and unfamiliar terrain around Tanzania, they not only faced German opposition, but also encountered aggressive swarms of African bees. The soldiers, dealing with both man-made and natural adversaries, found themselves in a challenging and chaotic situation. Despite the numerical superiority of the Allied forces, the encounter with the bees added an element of unpredictability to the battle, contributing to overall difficulties faced by the troops. Ultimately, the Battle of Tanga concluded with a German victory. The War of Jenkins' Ear was a war fought between the United Kingdom and Spain because of a captain's ear. A British merchant ship named the Rebecca was stopped by the Spanish Coast Guard, who accused the ship of smuggling. The Spanish Coast Guard cut off the captain's ear, starting the creatively named War of Jenkins' Ear. The Battle of Oswego Fortress, or much more coolly, the Attack of the Dead Men, was a battle that was fought between Russians and Germans in World War I. As German forces launched heavy artillery and gas attack on the Russian-held fortress, the defending Russian soldiers, despite being heavily affected by the gas, mounted a counterattack. The gas caused many of the soldiers to die, die, but the ones that survived had permanent horrific scarring across their faces, giving them the appearance of dead men. The German soldiers, horrified and convinced that they were facing the rise in dead, retreated in panic. The Second Congo War was a war which took place in the Democratic Republic of the Congo from 1999 to 2003, making it one of the most deadly conflicts in modern African history. Various neighboring countries, seeking to exploit the situation for their own interests, became involved in the conflict. The war resulted in widespread displacement, human rights abuses, and a humanitarian crisis. Millions of lives were lost, and the conflict had a profound impact on the stability and development of the region. The Lobster War was a war that occurred between Brazil and France in the late 1960s, primarily over a lobster-rich territory near a Brazilian archipelago. French fishermen were operating near these islands, and in 1963, tensions reached a critical point when Brazilian naval vessels clashed with French ships. The Lobster War, although short-lived, brought attention to the competition for maritime resources and the enforcement of territorial boundaries. The Whiskey War is our next entry. However, I already covered the Whiskey War in this video. The first war in level 3 is the Toledo War, a unique and largely bloodless boundary dispute that took place between the US states of Ohio and Michigan. These states fought over a strip of land known as the Toledo Strip. Both Ohio and Michigan sought to gain control of the area, which held strategic value due to its importance to access of the Great Lakes. Tensions escalated in 1835 when both Ohio and Michigan militias were mobilized, but the only actual casualty occurred when a Michigan sheriff was injured. At the end of the war, Michigan agreed to cede the Toledo Strip to Ohio in exchange for the Upper Peninsula, a region rich in natural resources. The 335 Years' War was a war that was surprisingly fought for 335 years. This was a war fought between the Isle of Scilly fought between the Isles of Sicily and the Netherlands. This was one of the longest wars. The conflict supposedly began in 1651 during the English Civil War, when the Isles of Sicily, a small archipelago off of the southwestern tip of the United Kingdom, declared war on the Netherlands. The details of why the war started are unclear. There is no records of significant hostilities. Remarkably, the two nations remained in a state of war for 335 years without any actual fighting or resolution. It wasn't until 1986 that a historian discovered the ongoing, unaddressed conflict. The belligerents finally agreed to a peace treaty, officially ending the 335 Years' War. The Honey War was a conflict that occurred in 1839 between the US states of Iowa and the US territory of Missouri. The term Honey War originates from an incident during the conflict when a settler named William Brown from Iowa accused a Missourian, John Anderson, of stealing his bees. Eventually, the boundary dispute was resolved through negotiation and surveys, and both of the sides agreed to accept the Sullivan Line as the official border between Iowa and Missouri. The Sonderbund War, or the Swiss Civil War, was a quick war between the federal government and 7 Catholic cantons. The Catholic cantons, seeking to preserve their traditional authority and resist the influence of the more liberal and Protestant cantons, formed the Sonderbund in 1845. Tensions escalated, leading to the outbreak of hostilities in 1847. The war lasted for a few weeks and resulted in a decisive victory for the federal forces. After the victory, Switzerland adopted a new constitution in 1848, strengthening the authority of the federal government and emphasizing national unity. The Battle of Kranzsebes was insane and could get an entire video, but I'll give you a short summary. Fought between Austria. Yeah. The Austrian army, consisting of soldiers from different ethnic backgrounds and languages, camped near the town of Kranzsebes. In a series of unfortunate events, a group of soldiers found a stash of alcohol and began celebrating. Since there were multiple ethnicities, communication was a severe issue. Rumors started spreading that the Ottomans were fighting against them. The disorientated Austrian soldiers, who didn't even understand each other, misunderstood the situation and started fighting among themselves. The chaos escalated, resulting in the self-inflicted disaster, where thousands of Austrian troops were killed or wounded by friendly fire. The Battle of Mosul refers to the military campaign that took place around the city of Mosul in Iraq. The battle involved Iraqi national security forces against ISIS. The campaign aimed to liberate Mosul, Iraq's second largest city, from ISIS control. The operation was complex and challenging due to the urban nature of the city. The battle involved tense street-to-street fighting, and the Iraqi forces gradually gained control of various neighborhoods. The liberation of the city was officially declared in July 2017, marking a significant turning point in the fighting against ISIS in Iraq. The Canada-Croatia War, also called Croatia's Operation Palkin 93, was a military operation between Serbia and Croatia. I think the Canada-Croatia War term is a misunderstanding. The war operation mentioned was undertaken by the Croatian army in 1993 during the Croatian War of Independence. However, Canadian forces did play a role in peacekeeping efforts in the region during and after the conflict. After international pressure and ceasefire negotiations, the operation concluded in a US brokered agreement. The Aleutian Island Campaign was a World War II campaign which is special due to being the only front fought in North America. It took place in the Aleutian Islands and involved the United States and Canada against Japan. The Japanese sought to occupy several islands, possibly to divert US attention from other strategic areas in the Pacific. The harsh Arctic conditions, coupled with challenging terrain, made the Aleutian Campaign particularly difficult for both sides. The The Northern Crusades refers to Christianization campaigns undertaken by Catholic Christian military orders to convert the pagan, Baltic, Finnic, and West Slavic peoples around the Baltic Sea. The Kettle War, also known as the Potato War, was a diplomatic conflict that occurred between the Netherlands and the Holy Roman Empire in the mid-18th century. This was caused by a fucking kettle. An international conflict was caused by something as small and stupid as a kettle. Humans really are smart, aren't we? Anyway, the dispute arose from the detainment of a French ambassador's coachman by Dutch customs officials over smuggling allegations. The conflict became known as the Kettle War because, according to the legend, a Dutch custom officer had confiscated a kettle from the Frenchman's ambassador's coachman. The Paraguayan War, or the War of the Triple Alliance, was a South American war that lasted from 1864 to 1870. This war is known for the devastation it caused Paraguay, with 1.2 million deaths, or 90% of the pre-war male population in Paraguay dying. The conflict continues to affect the present day, with it being the cause of present-day low marriage rates and high rates of out-of-wedlock birth. Out-of-wedlock means born out of one-night stand, / born illegitimately, / born a bastard. The first war in the fourth level is the French-Wales War, also known as the Battle of Fishguard. This wasn't a war between France and Wales, but rather, it was part of a larger war of the First Coalition during the French Revolutionary Wars. This battle was notable because it involved French troops trying to land onto British land. The Battle of Damalies was fought in 1431 and was part of a larger campaign of a crusade against the Hussites. It was a significant engagement between the Hussites, led by Prokop the Great, and the Crusader forces, led by Sigismund. There's nothing notable about this conflict. The Watermelon War, also known as the Watermelon Revolt, happened in 1856. A train arrived in Panama City carrying 1,000 California-bound passengers, including a sizable minority of women and children. The incident started around 6 p.m. when a group of 3 or 4 American passengers confronted a fruit vendor, Jose Manuel Luna, near the train station. One of the passengers, possibly named Jack Oliver, took a slice of watermelon and then refused to pay for it. After a verbal exchange, Oliver pulled out a gun and Luna approached him with a knife. One of the other passengers stepped in and paid Luna. Shortly afterwards, hundreds of men, armed with machetes, stones, and other weapons gathered and began fighting with the Americans, who fought back with their guns and other weapons. The Red River Bridge War was an interstate conflict in the United States. Oklahoma and Texas fought over a bridge. The center of the conflict, the bridge over the Red River, served as a border between the two states. The controversy arose when Oklahoman authorities declared that the bridge was too weak to support heavy truck traffic. As a result, they imposed restrictions on the weight of the trucks allowed to cross the bridge. Texas, on the other hand, contested these restrictions and argued that the bridge was safe for heavier loads. Both states mobilized their National Guard units, and there were instances of armed standoffs between the two sides. Eventually, a temporary truce was reached, and the U.S. Supreme Court settled the matter by ruling in favor of Oklahoma's right to regulate traffic on the bridge. The Andorra-German War was more of a symbolic war between Andorra and Germany. During World War I, Andorra declared war on Germany without actually sending over troops or support. This is unique, considering Andorra and Germany don't touch each other, and Andorra is a landlocked country, completely surrounded by Spain and France. In 1795, capture of the Dutch fleet was a significant event during the French Revolutionary War. A French army invaded the Dutch Republic, and as French forces advanced, the waterways and ports of the Dutch Republic became crucial strategic points. Faced with the prospect of falling into French hands, the Dutch government ordered its navy to sail to the safety of the Batavian Republic. However, due to various circumstances, the Dutch fleet was unable to reach the Republic and found itself trapped in the ice-covered waters near Texel Island. The French army, realizing the vulnerable position of the Dutch fleet, launched an attack. This is notable considering French cavalry, yes, horses, invaded the navy. The Battle of Lake Tanganyika occurred between the French, German, and British Navy vessels, fought in the expansive and remote waters of Lake Tanganyika. The conflict involved the British ship seeking to neutralize the threat by posing as German vessels. This battle was unique because of its location, with it in Central Africa, and not like any other traditional naval battle. After a brief but intense battle, the Germans scuttled their ships to prevent the capture. The Battle of the League of Cambrai, also known as the Holy League War, was a war that was fought between several European powers. This war was primarily fought between the Republic of Venice and a coalition known as the League of Cambrai, which included the Papal States, the Holy Roman Empire, France, and others. Venice became a target in this war due to its territorial expansion in northern Italy. The League ultimately achieved its goals, leading to territorial changes and alterations in the balance of power in the region. Our first entry in the final level is Madman's War. This was a revolt against French rule in Indochina. This took place around World War I. The natives, called the Hmong, won battle after battle, using the irregular terrain to their advantage. The French were surprised and did not know how to fight in the jungles, or how to fight a guerrilla warfare. At its heights, the rebellion encompassed 40,000 square kilometers of Indochina. As World War I came to an end, the French reinforcements began to outnumber the rebels, and their firepower overpowered the Hmong. The Battle of Athens refers to a revolt that took place in Athens, Tennessee in 1946. It was not a traditional military battle, but rather a political and civil conflict. In August 1946, tensions arose in Athens over allegations of political corruption and election fraud. A group of veterans and other concerned citizens confronted the local authorities, leading to an armed standoff. The conflict escalated and shots were fired. The citizens ultimately took control of the situation, and the elected officials were reassigned. The War of the Stray Dog refers to a diplomatic incident that occurred between Greece and Bulgaria in 1925. The incident began when a Greek soldier crossed the border into Bulgaria in search of his lost dog. The soldier was shot and killed by Bulgarian border guards. This event triggered a series of border clashes and escalated into a crisis. International intervention, notably by the League of Nations, helped defuse the situation. If Day was a simulated German Nazi invasion, an occupation exercise conducted in the city of Winnipeg, Canada. The exercise took place on February 1942, and it was organized by the Canadian government to raise awareness and funds for the war effort. The simulation was intended to help Canadians understand the potential consequences of a Nazi invasion and occupation. Gobi Chimpanzee War was an interesting and notable event, observed in the Gobi Stream National Park in Tanzania. This war was fought between one tribe of chimpanzees versus the other. These encounters included lethal attacks, territorial disputes, and the killing of several chimpanzees. It challenged earlier perceptions of chimpanzees as peaceful and cooperative, revealing aspects of their nature that resembled organized warfare. The Caligula-Neptune War was an insane military conflict that Caligula declared on the ocean. The idea that Caligula declared war on Neptune is not based on historical records or primary sources, but rather on creative liberties. Apparently, he ordered his men to take shells as spoils of war. The Battle of Lake Baikal was certainly interesting. In August 1918, the Czechoslovak Legion engaged in military operations in the region around the lake. The Legion was composed of Czech and Slovak soldiers, which found themselves caught up in the complex and fluid situation of the Russian Civil War. The Legion was initially formed to fight against the Central Powers on the Eastern Front during World War I. However, with the collapse of the Russian front and the Bolshevik seizure of power, the Czechoslovak Legion found itself in Siberia, attempting to make its way out of Russia. As they sought to evacuate and make their way to Vladivostok, they eventually returned to Europe. The Legion faced resistance from various factors, including the Red Army. The Conch Rebellion was not a serious rebellion or succession, but rather a humorous and symbolic secessionist movement staged by residents of Key West, Florida. The protest and establishment of the Conch Republic were in response to the U.S. Border Patrol roadblock on U.S. Highway 1, just north of the entrance to the Florida Keys. The roadblock caused delays and inconvenienced the residents. In response, Key West residents, led by the mayor, staged a mock secession of the United States on April 1982. They proclaimed themselves the Conch Republic and declared war on the United States. Weather Station Kurt was a secret German weather station established in the Arctic during World War I. It was part of Germany's meteorological efforts to gather weather data, particularly for the benefit of U-boat operations in the Arctic Ocean. The station's discovery by Soviet forces in 1944 revealed a previously unknown German presence. That's all, people. Subscribe.